So fellas, this week Gilbert Burns tries breaking his losing streak to undefeated welterweight prospect Marco Morales in a Fight Night main event. We are back in the Apex after 4 weeks, which is quite unfortunate, but to be fair, it's not that bad for an Apex card. If I had to rate the card for a Fight Night, I'd give it like a 6 out of 10. We've had worse in the Apex. There's some decent fights, decent names on it for an Apex card, and I think there is going to be quite a few finishes, so we're going to be breaking down every fighter on Burns versus Morales, as well as my own personal predictions, and we're going there with the first fight, Conor Matthews versus Yadier Delvalle. Now, Conor Matthews on the regional scene had a 100% finishing rate, every single one of his finishes coming in by the first round. He gets a shot at the Contender Series, loses on the Contender Series to Francis Marshall, gets another finish on the regional scene in the first round, and then goes back to the Contender Series, wins a decision on the Contender Series, but so far in the UFC, he's 0-2, both by TKO. As he takes on Delvalle, there's not really much to break down when it comes to Delvalle. He's undefeated on the regional scene, and he got a win on the Contender Series, and now this is his UFC debut as he takes on Conor Matthews. I just think it's going to be a striking matchup where Delvalle does the better. I do feel like Delvalle's the better striker than Conor Matthews. Conor Matthews, despite his high finishing rate on the regional scene, I feel like he's a better grappler than he is striker, and he hasn't really shown up to be a great striker so far in the UFC, whereas Delvalle, obviously this is his UFC debut, but he looks a lot more technically sound than Conor Matthews on the regional scene, even though I will say Delvalle kind of does sometimes swing for the fences. It seems like sometimes he forces a finish too much, which kind of doesn't go his way, but I just think Delvalle's the better striker. Conor Matthews hasn't really been shown to be UFC worthy. I mean, getting finished by Bazooka as well is quite a bad look, so I'm going to go Yadier Delvalle to win this one by decision. Could even get a late stoppage, but I think Conor Matthews will ride it out, but I do think that Yadier Delvalle will get this one done by decision. And then we have one of the, I think there's 3 or 4 women MMA fights on this card, which is unfortunate, but we've got Luana Pinheiro taking on Pennington. Now, Pinheiro comes into the UFC on the regional scene on quite a big finishing streak, gets a finish on the Contender Series, goes 3-0 in the UFC after that, including a win over Marcos, which ended in I think it was a stoppage, but it was a DQ, so it didn't really count. But then after that, she goes on a bit of a loser streak. She gets finished not once, but twice in a row. She also loses to Julian Robertson in the most recent fight, and she's also been losing in grappling. It's all been going wrong for Luana Pinheiro in the past couple of bouts, and she's going to be taking on Pennington, and if you didn't know, she is the wife of Raquel Pennington, former champion, and she might be the biggest decision machine right now in the UFC. She's only ever had 2 finishes in her entire professional career. She's the definition of a decision machine. To come into the UFC on a 4-fight, you guessed it, decision streak, but to be fair, she picked up wins over Rose Namajunas and Paige Van Sant, comes through on the Ultimate Fighter, goes 2-2 on the Ultimate Fighter, then goes on quite a big winning streak on the UFC with her only loss being to Namajunas, followed by a 4-fight losing streak, but she's kind of saved the contract as she's gone 4-2 in her last couple of fights, coming off a win over Carla Esparza. Luana Pinheiro is kind of like a prospect that got fraud checked, and now she's not really been able to recover. She had quite a lot of hype after the Gomes fight, but even that Gomes fight, she made it quite competitive with Michelle Waterson Gomes, and now she's on a 3-fight losing streak. I'm going to go Pennington to win this one by decision. It's a pretty confident pick. There's no way in hell that Pennington wins this fight. Luana Pinheiro was able to survive against Julian Robertson, and Pennington's, like I said before, just not somebody that really gets finishes, but I do feel like she's the better fighter than Luana Pinheiro. She's definitely the better striker. I'm a bigger fan of her output. I feel like there's more keys to victory for Pennington in this fight than Luana Pinheiro. On top of that as well, with Pennington, at least she's actually making it competitive with the fighters at the top. Like, for example, that fight with Tabatha Ricci and Mackenzie Dern, I do think she lost those fights, but it isn't like she got her ass whooped, and those are both, you know, top 10, top 15 worthy fighters, especially Mackenzie Dern, whereas Luana Pinheiro getting finished by 40-year-old Angela Hill, getting finished by Amanda Ribas, and obviously going to a decision with Michelle Waterson Gomez, not Michelle Waterson Gomez, what's her name, Julian Robertson, even though Julian Robertson is, you know, a very dangerous fighter in herself. I'm going to go Pennington to win this one by decision, keeps the fight standing, has the better output on the feet, and just gets a unanimous decision across 3 rounds over Luana Pinheiro, who hasn't really been able to live up to the hype. Hyung Park, undefeated 9-0, takes on Carlos Hernandez. Now, Hyung Park had a 5-fight winning streak on the regional scene with 4 finishes, comes over to the road to the UFC, gets 2 finishes on road to the UFC, which gives him a UFC contract, and he's 2-0 again in finishes so far in the UFC, as he takes on Carlos Hernandez, who was riding a win streak on the regional scene, became a champion, gets a win on the Contender Series, but so far in the UFC, it's not really been going his way, as he has notably lost to the likes of Ray Sarui and Tatsuro Taira, and he's a bit of a win-loss fighter nowadays in the UFC, is Carlos Hernandez. I'm going to go with Hyung Park to win this one by decision. It seems to be a bit of a theme of Carlos Hernandez losing to Asian prospects. It happened with Tatsuro Taira, it happened with Ray Saruya, and it's happening again with Hyung Park. The UFC just keep putting Carlos Hernandez against these Asian prospects, and Hyung Park is riding, I think, a 4-fight finishing streak, as I said before. I think he's a very clear key to victory for Hyung Park. Take the fight to the mat against Carlos Hernandez and just beat him with the grappling, and he is a busy grappler with Hyung Park. We've been seeing a lot recently, these Koreans that come from a grappling background. They've got very busy kind of grappling style, and we've seen this from Hyung Park so far in the UFC, and I think he's going to work against Carlos Hernandez. Now, Hernandez hasn't got bad grappling. He was able to get up quite a few times against Ray Saruya, but we've seen him get taken down before by these Asian wrestlers. I can see it happening again. I'm going undefeated Hyung Park to beat Carlos Hernandez by decision as he rides out with the grappling and gets a decision win over Carlos Hernandez. And we have once again another women MMA fight as Denise Gomes takes on Elise Reed. Now, Denise Gomes ended up losing her first fight in a professional career, but after that started riding a winning streak. Comes from the Contender Series, gets a decision win, loses her UFC debut, but after that she gets 2 straight finishes, including, I think it was an 18-second knockout against Yasmin Yaregi at UFC 290. And since then, she's got 1-2 as she is now 2-1 as she's now riding a 2-fight winning streak. As she takes on Elise Reed, who went undefeated on the regional scene, becoming a champion on the regional scene, and she's just been the definition of a win-loss fighter so far in the UFC. She'll win one and then lose the next, and it's also important to note that she has been finished in every single one of her losses so far in the UFC. I know it's very, very, it's difficult to pick a women MMA fight to win by finish, but I'm going to do it, I'm going to go Denise Gomes to win this one by TKO in the second round. I think if there's ever a women MMA fight you can pick by, some sort of finish, this is going to be one of them. Denise Gomes has pop in her shots. She's a pretty powerful hitter. I know she couldn't really get the finish over Kowalkiewicz in her last fight, which is a shame because Kowalkiewicz is getting up there in age. But Denise Gomes, when she's in the flow of things, she has got pop in her shots. She's quite a high-paced fighter, and like I said before, Elise Reed is definitely susceptible to being finished. She's been finishing all 4 of her losses. Fair enough, a lot of them included grappling, but it isn't like Denise Gomes doesn't have grappling either. So I feel like at some point within this fight, we're going to see Denise Gomes clip Elise Reed and go for the finish, and I believe she will. Elise Reed is just a rangy striker, very basic striker as well. She's fought these lower-level women MMA fighters and haven't really been able to put the stamp on the performances. I think she's kind of met her cap in the UFC. I can't really see her going far, whereas Denise Gomes only lost being to Angela Hill. She's won 4 of her last 5. She's had 2 finishes in the UFC, 2 in a row as well, which is impressive for women MMA. So I'm going to actually go with Denise Gomes to get a stoppage over Elise Reed. TKOs are in the second round is my prediction. I just think the finishing ability of Denise Gomes, paired with the fact that Elise Reed is always susceptible to getting finished and has been finished 4 times out of all 4 losses in a professional career, I'm going Denise Gomes by TKO in the second round. And then another women MMA fight. Luana Santos takes on Tianara Lisboa. Now, Luana Santos had a bit of a run on the regional scene, comes over to the UFC, gets not 1 but 2 straight finishes, and was a bit of a prospect as well. And then after that gets a decision win over Stephanie Egger, but then she ended up losing to Casey O'Neill at UFC 305 as a massive favourite, which was quite a letdown. And she's also been getting up to dodgy activities with dogs. If you know, you know. As she takes on Lisboa, who was a former Muay Thai fighter, actually ended up fighting Valentina Shevchenko way back in kickboxing and Muay Thai back in 2010, and obviously lost both of them. Had a bit of a solid run in the regional scene, ended up losing to Norma Dummett in a professional debut, but so far in the UFC she's 2-0, as she's managed to get a rear naked choke as well in one of those fights. It's a tough fight to pick. It's a new weight class as well for Santos, but I'm going to go with Luana Santos to win this one by decision. It is a tough one to pick, especially after Luana Santos performed like that against Casey O'Neill, but she was a former prospect, and I still feel like she's kind of talented. She's a very good grappler, Luana Santos. She's got popping and shots on the feet, and I did think that she was going to go far, like I said, before that fight with Casey O'Neill. And Lisboa, I'm still not entirely sure how good she is. She's getting up there in age. I mean, I think she's like 33, 34, which is quite old for a women MMA fighter specifically. And it isn't like she's, performed amazing in both of her fights so far. Apart from that submission win against Clark, even in that fight with Oliveira, it wasn't like she she was dominating Oliveira. There was times in that fight where she was in trouble. So I think Luana Santos is just a slightly better fighter. I think she's going to neutralize the striking. It's a fairly even fight on the feet, but I think the grappling of Luana Santos is where we're going to see this fight take over. I'm sure she's improved since that performance against Casey O'Neill, because before Casey O'Neill, she was looking like she was going to go quite far with Luana Santos. A lot of stoppages on the regional scene, very good grappler in herself. So I'm trusting that Luana Santos isn't like the next Luana Pinheiro, where she's just going to go on a bit of a losing streak after being a prospect, but I do trust the hype of Luana Santos. I think she can go far, and even though Lisboa's, I guess a bit of a prospect in the UFC right now, she's not massively impressed me in both of her fights. I'm going Luana Santos to win this one by decision. And then we have a fight between two kind of veterans of the lightweight division as Jared Gordon takes on Thiago Moises. Now, Jared Gordon had a massive run on the regional scene, becoming a champion as well. Big run on the regional scene. Comes over to the UFC, wins his first 2 fights in the UFC. After that, ends up going 1-3 in his next couple of fights, including getting finished by Charles Oliveira. But after that, goes and wins 4-1, or goes 4-1 in his next 5 fights, until he gets that infamous fight with Paddy Pimblett, where he loses an extremely controversial decision where most fans thought that Jared Gordon should have won that fight, which is actually obviously aged really well, because now Paddy Pimblett's a top 5 lightweight in the world. So it's a loss that has kind of aged really well, especially when most people thought Jared Gordon won. After that, he gets a no contest after Bobby Green just headbutts him into a no contest. He then gets a finish over Mark Madsen and lost his most recent fight to Nasrat Haqparast, but again, it was quite a controversial decision where a lot of people, including myself, thought that Jared Gordon had done enough to win that fight. As he takes on Thiago Moises. Thiago Moises, again, another guy with a massive career on the regional scene, becoming a champion on the regional scene, gets a good finish on the Contender Series, a brutal head kick knockout, and then so far in the UFC, he's had a massive kind of, I don't want to say a win-loss career because he has been winning the majority of his fights, but he's been facing killers, man. He's faced the likes of Islam Makhachev, Beneil Dariush, Benoit Saint Denis, Yoel Alvarez, Ludovic Klein, Bobby Green, Michael Johnson. He's been facing straight killers in the UFC so far, and it is important to note that he's coming off a good win in his most recent fight over Trey Ogden, where he was able to completely slash the leg of Trey Ogden in his most recent fight. It is a tough one to pick because Jared Gordon, like I said, controversial decision losses to Nasrat Haqparast and Paddy Pimblett, and apart from that, he's been winning the majority of his fights, and he's a solid boxer. And he takes on Thiago Moises, who's definitely past his prime, but it's not like he's washed or anything like, I mean, he's not like he's fully washed. He's still got the skills to pay the bills. You know, his kickboxing looked really good in his fight with Ogden, and he's known for having that, you know, jiu-jitsu, grappling, heavy base. I'm going to lean towards Thiago Moises winning this one by decision, though. It's a weird one with Thiago Moises because I feel like every single time I want to pick him to win, and then he always ends up fumbling it. But he had some good wins. Like I said, the recent one over Trey Ogden, which in my opinion is going to be a much higher pace threat than a guy like Jared Gordon. And then that win over Melquizael Costa as well a few years ago. If you know Melquizael Costa, who's on this card, he's been on an absolute roll recently. Whereas Jared Gordon, I mean, that win over Madsen, I don't think Madsen's competed in mixed martial arts since that fight, and it hasn't like he's had any, you know, massive standout wins in his past couple of fights as Jared Gordon, and he's been quite inactive as well. He's fighting an average once a year or twice a year, but it's, you know, there's long breaks in between all of his fights, whereas Thiago Moises seems to be a lot more active, and he's faced killers before. He's beaten a few of them. I just think Thiago Moises wins this fight. I can see the grappling of Thiago Moises where he takes Jared Gordon to the mat being a big threat, even though Jared Gordon does have good kind of take down the fence. We've seen Jared Gordon succeed in dogfights before, like the one with Nasrat Haqparast, but I feel like Thiago Moises is just slightly better than Jared Gordon in every aspect of the fight, apart from maybe boxing. So I can't really say how I think this fight's going to go. I do think it's going to be a bit of a back and forth scrap, where if anybody's going to mix in the grappling, it's going to be Thiago Moises. So I'm going to go Thiago Moises by decision, but again, not a fight that I would really recommend betting on, but I do think it's going to be a banger of a fight, which brings us on to Matheus Camilo versus Gabe Green. Now, Matheus Camilo, if you don't know who he is, he went in a bit of a run on the regional scene, and if you don't know, his most recent fight over Nabokov, that Nabokov guy was actually the guy who asked Dana White for an opportunity to fight in the UFC at that one press conference for UFC 308, and Dana White said, if you win a fight in the regional scene, we'll give you a contract, and that fight on the regional scene was against none other than Camilo himself, and he ended up beating Nabokov as well to earn himself a UFC contract. That's kind of stole the contract from Nabokov as he takes on Gabe Green. Now, Gabe Green had a big career on the regional scene, ended up losing to Jalin Turner in 36 seconds. After that, ended up riding a finishing streak. Ended up losing his UFC debut to Daniel Rodriguez, picked up a 2-fight winning streak, including a finish. Then gets booked against Ian Gary, gets beaten by Ian Gary. Then gets booked against Brian Battle and got KO'd in 14 seconds by Brian Battle. And it's a weird one for Gabe Green because he's just been KO'd by Brian Battle, who's now a middleweight. No, is he middleweight or is he welterweight? No, he's a welterweight. And he's now moving down to the 155-pound division for the first time against Matheus Camilo. I'm going to go with Camilo to win this one by decision. Gabe Green hasn't really been showing up in the UFC, and I understand the 3 guys that he's lost to are all fairly solid opponents. Ian Gary, obviously a top 5 welterweight right now. Brian Battle's been on a roll, and Daniel Rodriguez is, you know, won his last 2 fights as well. But it isn't like Gabe Green has looked insanely talented, and I feel like Camilo's been impressing me recently. You know, he's riding this big winning streak, just stole the opportunity of Nabokov as well. It's not going to be a complete slow out as well, but again, we're going to be seeing Gabe Green come down to 155, and as well as that, the inactivity of Gabe Green. This guy's been very inactive, not only just after his Brian Battle fight, which was all the way back in 2023, but even in between all of his fights. He fights on average once a year. He's not the most active fighter. He's moving in a new weight class against Matheus Camilo, who's been on a roll as well, just got a good win. So I'm going to lean towards Camilo winning this one by decision, keeps the fight standing and just picks apart Gabe Green on the feet and picks up a decision win at 155. So I'm going to go Camilo. Again, there's a lot of questions that we don't really know coming into this fight because we've never seen Camilo in the UFC. We haven't seen him get past a Contender Series test, and Gabe Green is making his debut at 155, but I am leaning towards Camilo by decision. Anyway, Julian Erosa takes on Melquizael Costa. Really good fight in the featherweight division. Julian Erosa had a massive career on the regional scene, becoming a champion. Gets an opportunity on the Ultimate Fighter, the Hernandez versus Frankie Edgar season. Goes 3-0 in the Ultimate Fighter, but ends up getting knocked out by none other than Artem Lotov, the GOAT in the finale. But he still gets a UFC contract where he gets finished in his UFC debut. So he goes back to the regional scene where he notably lost to Paddy Pimblett on Cage Warriors. Then he gets an opportunity on the Contender Series, gets a finish on the Contender Series, then goes 3-0 in the UFC. So he goes back to the regional scene for a second time, where he gets another UFC contract for a third time. And so far in this run, he goes on a bit of a win streak, takes 2 losses, but since then, he's now riding a 3-fight finishing streak, with his most recent win being at UFC 314 a couple of months, well, just last month, as he finished Darren Elkins. He's going to be taking on Melquizael Costa, who had a massive run on the regional scene. Comes over to the UFC as a 2-2 fighter, but in 2025 so far, he's submitted Andre Fili and beat Christian Rodriguez. 2 very impressive wins. And like I said, he's been very active. Those 2 wins were just 1 month away from each other. This fight against Julian Erosa is only a month and a half after his last fight. So both of these guys have been very, very active. Both of these guys are riding winning streaks, but with a lot of finishes in there too. So it's a good matchup that the UFC put on. But I do think Melquizael Costa gets this one done by submission. Melquizael Costa has been looking amazing in his last couple of fights. He lost to Steve Garcia. Steve Garcia's on a roll in the featherweight division right now, and he lost to Moises. But like I said, you look at his 3-fight win streak that he's put together. That submission of Andre Fili, who was tagging him on the feet. Andre Fili shoots a takedown, and he immediately wraps up that guillotine. That fight with Christian Rodriguez. If you know C-Rod's been on an absolute roll in the featherweight division as well, fraud checking every prospect. He wasn't able to fraud check Melquizael Costa. Melquizael Costa outclassed him in that fight, and Julian Erosa, he's riding a 3-fight winning streak, but look who he's beaten. You know, Ramos is losing all over the place these days. Darren Elkins is 45 years old, needs to be put in a care home. He's in a worse state than Stipe Miocic. So it isn't like Julian Erosa's going out there and beating these top-level fighters on this winning streak. Whereas Melquizael Costa, I can see this dude potentially making a run for the top 15 of the featherweight division. So I'm going to go with Melquizael Costa to submit him in the first round. A very good submission artist is Melquizael Costa, and so is Julian Erosa. But I see Melquizael Costa taking this fight to the mat, potentially dropping Julian Erosa and latching up a submission with his pounce at some point in the first round. So I'm going to go Melquizael Costa to submit Julian Erosa and make that 3 wins in 2025. Then we've got a fight where you can almost guarantee a knockout. Nursulton Ruziboev versus Dustin Stolsfuz. Nursulton Ruziboev might have one of the biggest runs I've ever seen on the regional scene. This guy's run on the regional scene has been absolutely huge. He's had like 99% of his career on the regional scene. So far in the UFC, he finishes Bruno Ferreira in his UFC debut. Then he goes out there and finishes Cedric Damas, gets a step up against Joaquin Buckley, loses a decision to Joaquin Buckley, and is coming off another KO win against Eric McConaughey in his most recent fight. He takes on Dustin Stolsfuz, who had a really good run on the regional scene, also getting a twister as he became a champion on the regional scene. Got a good win over Joe Pyfer in the Contender Series, but it was more of an injury win. Goes 0-3 in the UFC in his next couple of fights, getting submitted by the likes of Rodolfo Vieira and Jared Mearshart. Picks up one over Dwight Grant, gets finished by Abbas Magomedov. Picks up one over Punahele Soriano, gets finished by Bruno Ferreira, and in his most recent fight has just knocked out Marc-Andre Barriot. So he's kind of like a bit of a kill or be killed fighter is Dustin Stolsfuz. He's either going to get KO'd, submitted, or he's going to do the submitting, or he's going to do the knocking out. He's like dangerous everywhere, but he's also so vulnerable anyway. But I'm going to go with Nursulton Ruziboev to win this one by KO in the first round. Yeah, Nursulton Ruziboev has been on an absolute roll. Very, very dangerous striker. So rangy for the division. All it takes is one to tag you, and then he's wobbling his opponents all over the place. That win over Bruno Ferreira has aged massively as well, and I feel like he's now kind of got into it in the welterweight division. Even that fight with Joaquin Buckley, who's now a top welterweight, that fight was kind of competitive on the feet. If anyone was winning that fight on the feet, it was Ruziboev, and obviously he's not meant to be at welterweight. He's a natural middleweight. And Dustin Stolsfuz, he's just too inconsistent for my liking. I mean, well done, you knocked out Marc-Andre Barriot, who's got an expired chin. He's got a couple of good wins in the UFC. He's Dustin Stolsfuz, but he's just not reliable enough. I think Nursulton Ruziboev is a far better kickboxer, far more dangerous kickboxer as well, and I think he's going to clip and knock out Dustin Stolsfuz in the first round and get a KO in the first round against Dustin Stolsfuz. So my pick is going to be Nursulton Ruziboev, brutal KO. Sodiq Yusuff returns as he takes on Mairon Santos, who just fought at UFC 313. Now, Sodiq Yusuff had a good run on the regional scene, got a good win on the Contender Series as well. Then in the UFC, goes on on an absolute roll, winning the vast majority of his fights, with his only loss being to Mr. Arnold Allen himself. He then gets a main event against Edson Barboza, loses a decision to Edson Barboza, and then gets a slot on UFC 300 against Diego Lopez, and gets knocked out in the first round, and he hasn't been seen since. As he takes on Mairon Santos, who had another massive run on the regional scene, with the vast majority of them being finishers. Comes over on the Ultimate Fighter, goes 3-0 and wins the Ultimate Fighter tournament, winning the tournament on the season of Grasso and Shevchenko, and just got a really controversial win in his UFC debut against Francis Marshall, where 99% of fans would tell you that Francis Marshall should have won that fight. And he's getting a massive step up on short notice, not on short notice, but in a quick turnaround, as he takes on Sodiq Yusuff. Sodiq Yusuff is going to take him to school. I'm going to go with Sodiq Yusuff to win this one by decision. I was kind of contemplating picking him to win this one by KO, but it isn't like... I do know that, listen, Mairon Santos did get a controversial win over Francis Marshall, but it isn't like Mairon Santos is necessarily a bad striker. I can see him making it slightly competitive on the feet, but this is a massive step up. To go from a, questionably a loss to Francis Marshall all the way to Sodiq Yusuff, who was ranked before his fight with Diego Lopez. The only edge you can really give to Mairon Santos in this fight is the fact that, he's been a lot more active than Sodiq Yusuff. Sodiq Yusuff's been out for a year and he's lost 3 of his last 5, but he's lost 3 of his last 5 to guys who are top 15, top 20 worthy in the featherweight division. I'm hoping that Sodiq Yusuff is going to come back ready, and I just think he's a much more dangerous striker and just a much better striker than Mairon Santos. Is going to take this young kid to school. I'm going Sodiq Yusuff, unanimous decision to get the win over Mairon Santos. I think he's going to drop and maybe wobble Mairon Santos as well, because Sodiq Yusuff, even though he's not really known for his brutal KOs, he has got pop in his shots as well. So big step up for Mairon Santos that he hasn't really earned, and I think he's in a lot of trouble in this fight. Sodiq Yusuff wins this one by decision. Paul Craig tries getting a win to save his life as he takes on Rodolfo Bellato in the light heavyweight division, as he moves back up to light heavyweight. Now, Paul Craig on the regional scene had a 100% finishing rate and was a champion on the local scene. Gets a good finish in his UFC debut in just over a minute, but then ends up getting finished twice against Tyson Pedro and Khalil Roundtree. Then he ends up submitting none other than Mr. Magomed Ankalaev himself, and he's still the only other guy to beat Magomed Ankalaev in his professional career. Then ends up going 1-2 in his next 3 fights, followed up by not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 straight submission victories, including wins over Jamal Hill and Nikita Krylov in there. Then after that, it kind of just goes downhill. He loses against Volkan Oezdemir by decision, gets finished by Johnny Walker, moves down to middleweight where he finishes Andre Muniz, headlines a fight night against Brendan Allen, ends up getting destroyed by Brendan Allen, then gets knocked out by Caio Bravo and just got beaten by decision against Bo Nickel, which has not aged that well, as he takes on Rodolfo Bellato. Rodolfo Bellato on the regional scene was riding quite a big winning streak, with his only loss being to Vito Petrino. And he comes over to the Contender Series, and his Contender Series fight is against none other than Vito Petrino. And he rewrites history because he gets knocked out again by Vito Petrino. Comes over to the goes back to the regional scene, becomes a champion again, but then he comes on the Contender Series, gets a finish over Hijo Portieri in his UFC debut, and he's coming off a draw to Jimmy Crute at UFC 312 earlier on this year. I do think Rodolfo Bellato is way too big of a favorite in this fight. It's not like he's the next big thing. It's not like he's the next big knockout artist in the light heavyweight division. I think he's a very average striker for light heavyweight. I know he's got kind of like that intimidating frame and he's got a couple of knockouts, but he's not the best striker. But I just don't really see... But I just can't see Paul Craig winning, man. I'm going to go Bellato to win this one by TKO in the second round. I feel like weight class isn't necessarily the issue for Paul Craig. It's more of the fact that he's just shit. Rodolfo Bellato's better everywhere the fight goes, apart from obviously the jiu-jitsu. I think he can definitely keep this fight standing against Paul Craig. He did get taken down by Jimmy Crute, but he was able to keep the fight standing in the last 2, and he was able to pick apart Jimmy Crute across 3 rounds. So I think we're going to see Rodolfo Bellato just pick apart Paul Craig. I'm kind of sick of this whole thing that, oh, maybe Paul Craig pulls off the submission. Maybe he gets it done. Mate, the guy's lost, what, like 5 of his last 6 fights? The submission ain't coming. And we say this every fight, it never comes, and he just doesn't improve, does Paul Craig. He's one of those fighters. He doesn't improve at all. He's striking his shit. All he does on the feet is go for a body kick and then get beaten. He's kind of like a victim on the feet. He has no wrestling as well to take the fight to the mount. All he does is pull guard. And I think that now people have understood that you don't go to the, don't go in mount against Paul Craig and you're good. So I feel like Rodolfo Bellato is going to TKO him in the second round. Paul Craig is moving up a weight class against Rodolfo Bellato, who has got popping in shots, even though he's not necessarily a KO guy. I just think he picks apart Paul Craig until the point where it gets to the point where he has to TKO him. I'm going Rodolfo Bellato by TKO in the second round. There's always that slim opportunity that Paul Craig somehow gets the submission victory, but you know what I mean? Is it really going to happen? Is it actually going to happen? Would you bet your money on Paul Craig winning by submission? I wouldn't. I really do feel like this is going to be the last UFC fight of Paul Craig as he gets finished by Rodolfo Bellato. So I'm going to go I'm going to go Rodolfo Bellato, and I think he stops Paul Craig within 3. And then the main event, Gilbert Burns versus Michael Morales. Gilbert Burns trying to break that losing streak, and Marco Morales trying to keep that winning streak. Now, Marco Morales obviously had an undefeated run on the regional scene with a shit ton of stoppages. Comes on the Contender Series, gets a decision win, gets to finish in his first 2 fights in the UFC, both by knockout. Gets a 2-fight winning streak against Jake Matthews and Max Griffin. Gets a big fight with Neil Magny, and he just flatlined Neil Magny in his last fight to move to 17-0. As he takes on Gilbert Burns, who is a decorated grappler, competed in jiu-jitsu tournaments before MMA, went on a massive undefeated run on the regional scene in his MMA career. Then comes over to the UFC at 155 and goes on a bit of a run in the UFC where he ultimately gets knocked out by Dan Hooker, which, you know, this makes him decide to move up to welterweight. Goes on an absolute tear in the welterweight division, 5 straight wins with 2 finishes. He gets a Fight Night main event against former champion Tyron Woodley, beats Tyron Woodley, gets a title shot against Kamaru Usman, gets knocked out by Kamaru Usman. After that title shot, he goes 3-1 with his only loss being to Chimaev. But since then, it's been kind of bad for Gilbert Burns. He's been beaten by Bilal Muhammad, he's been knocked out by JDM, and he's lost a decision to Sean Brady. Now, to be fair to Gilbert Burns, those 3 losses have all aged really well. You know, Bilal Muhammad, former champion, JDM, current champion, Sean Brady, top contender, potential future champion. So it isn't like Gilbert Burns has been losing to bummers, but the guy's getting up there in age. He's definitely past his prime as well. Prime Gilbert Burns, I'd say, was the one maybe just after the Usman fight. I feel like you could even see in the Masvidal fight that he was kind of past his time, and he's on a 3-fight losing streak. He's been outstruck by Bilal Muhammad. He's been knocked out by JDM, even though he was having success in that fight. That fight with Sean Brady, he was being outstruck as well. I think Marco Morales clips him at some point in the fight. I'm going to go with Marco Morales by KO in the 3rd round. This is a big step up for Marco Morales after beating Neil Magny, but I just think he's a more technical guy. His takedown defense so far has shown to be pretty solid in the UFC's Marco Morales, and obviously he's got a lot more pop in his shots than Gilbert Burns, and he's just a better striker than Gilbert Burns as well. Burns, he looked alright on the feet against Jorge Masvidal, but that was mainly due to the threat of the takedown, and he's obviously got the big BJJ threat, but I'm going to go with the undefeated dude who's riding a winning streak, just knocked out Neil Magny, over the guy who's on a 3-fight losing streak, hasn't won a fight since 2023 now, early 2023. He's been finished in one of those losses, got outstruck by Bilal Muhammad and Sean Brady. I don't know what version of Gilbert Burns to expect. I think the safe pick is to go with Marco Morales, and if he is going to win, I think he's going to win by KO more than anything. So I'm going to go with Marco Morales to win this one by KO in the 3rd round, clips Gilbert Burns, drops him, goes for the TKO finish, and this could potentially be the final fight of Gilbert Burns' career. Now, a bit of a parlay, not really a parlay, but if I had to rank all my picks in terms of confidence, my high confidence picks are going to be Sodiq Yusuff by decision, Ruziboev by KO, Costa by submission, and Hyung Park by decision. Those are the ones I'm very confident in. Medium confidence are Marco Morales, Rodolfo Bolato, Camilo, Denise Gomes, and Tisha Pennington. Ones that I still think are going to go in the way that I've picked, but I wouldn't bet the house on it. And then low confidence picks are going to be Thiago, Moises, and Luana Santos. Ones that could go either way. Not really a confident pick, is what it is. Now, if I had to give out some bonus award predictions, so for example, the performance bonuses, who I think they're going to go for. I think the first performance bonus is going to go to Marco Morales. The UFC always like to give a bonus to whoever's in the main event or who's higher up on the card. And I feel like if Marco Morales does get the knockout win over Gilbert Burns, which I think he is going to do, then I can see the UFC giving him a bonus. So I see the first bonus going to Marco Morales. The second one is going to go to Nursulton Ruziboev. There's 100% going to be a bonus between Ruziboev and Dustin Stolsfuz. And I do believe that Ruziboev is going to get the job done. So I think he's going to get a quick finish over Dustin Stolsfuz. The UFC going to reward him with a performance bonus. I think the third bonus is going to be over Melquizael Costa. I can see him finishing Julian Erosa, whether it be by TKO or submission, more likely submission. I can see him being the only guy to get a submission on the card and therefore getting a performance bonus. And like I said before, I can see Denise Gomes getting a finish in this fight too. The UFC reward women when they get finishes. I remember there was a card a couple of cards ago where 2 women got a finish on the prelims and they both got bonuses. So if Denise Gomes does get a finish over Elise Reed, which I think she has a really good chance of doing, I can see the UFC giving Denise Gomes a bonus too. So I think those are going to be the performance bonuses. But the prospect of the card is none other than Mr. Marco Morales himself in the main event. You know, he's 17-0, undefeated, quite an underrated prospect in the welterweight division. Hasn't really been tested so far. And this is his first big test as he takes on Gilbert Burns. So if he does beat Gilbert Burns, he's now legitimized himself into a contender. This is kind of like a make it or break it for Marco Morales. Is he that good? So he's the biggest prospect on this card by far in the main event. The fight of the night prediction is going to go to Jared Gordon and Thiago Moises. Like I said in the prediction, both of these guys are rarely boring fights. Jared Gordon can have a scrap. He showed it in the fight with Nasrat hack press. He's had some good scraps before. And Thiago Moises, very dangerous dude, very well-rounded dude, also quite vulnerable in himself. So I think this is going to be a very back and forth fight. They both have success. Jared Gordon Gordon has success in the boxing. Thiago Moises has success at range and with the grappling. And I can see this being a fight of the night. The snooze fest of the card, I think, is going to be Tisha Pennington versus Luana Pinheiro. Yeah, Tisha Pennington with nearly a 100% decision rate against Luana Pinheiro, who's on like a, what, 3-4 fight losing streak. I can see this being a very low output points decision to Tisha Pennington, where she just does enough to win the fight. I don't see it going too far, and I don't see it being a great fight, to be honest. But those are my picks and predictions for UFC Fight Night Burns versus Morales. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the picks on this card, and if you'd change it and go any other way. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.